Hello and welcome to the 3D Blu-ray bunker. These aren't film reviews as such that I do here. I almost entirely just talk about the film's 3D and how well I think it works. And this time I'm looking at the 2011 film The Three Musketeers. The aspect ratio is 2.39 to 1 and it was natively filmed in 3D. Natively filmed 3D always raises hopes of some serious quality, the classic old school style of 3D filmmaking that's extremely rare these days. And the director Paul Anderson has made, I think, 4 films this way now, with Musketeers having been his second. The opening titles have some really creative 3D going on, with this map at first appearing to be flat, but as the camera moves in, we see that those ray lines are obviously above the map, and then that the place names are above the borders, and then we move on down amongst the army figures on the map. It's all quite nice 3D, and it's an extremely promising start. There's a hint of hyperstereo in this view above Venice, and the fireworks are sitting in 3D space above the city, so that's all quite pleasing. All the clouds here are also in space high above, even if the city itself lacks any depth. The film is absolutely packed with compositions and locations which lend themselves to fantastic 3D views. There are grand palatial staircases which stretch back into the frame, and several spectacular vast halls, just stunning locations where, again, the view stretches back into the frame. And whilst I'm sure that I'm not always consistent in doing this, I'm deliberately saying that the view stretches deep into the frame here, rather than deep into the screen, because this is a film where, whilst it's full of these fantastic compositions and settings, the 3D is, for the most part, to my eyes, desperately timid. This grand hallway, for example, doesn't display anything like the amount of stereoscopic depth that I think would have been reasonable to expect, although in the reverse view, because the camera is placed so much lower, the floor does stretch back into the screen, so this is a better 3D view. And this is really one of the few areas where I think the film's 3D looks particularly good. Shots where the camera is low to the ground, sometimes with the camera tracking from side to side or moving forwards, this is some perfectly fine 3D. But there are so many moments when it feels like it ought to be a lot more noticeable. Top-down views, for example, almost always offer a great feeling of height, but this view here is very mild, and same for what looks like Paul Anderson making a pitch for an Assassin's Creed movie here. There's very little stereoscopic feeling of height here, maybe because these aren't views of height when a character is in danger. They felt there was no point in giving a strong sense of height, but I don't buy that. I think this is just safe and weak 3D. I think I said a lot of the same things when I looked at the 3D film that Paul Anderson made after this one, Pompeii, where it was also a great looking film that if you watched it in 2D you could imagine how great it should look in 3D, but I just don't think it does. Not all of those corridors are dull in 3D. This one, for example, which is more compact than the grander ones, so it's easier to make it look three-dimensional, this one does look okay, and more so when they get torches going to light it up. There are a few times when you think that the 3D is about to deliver something, like seeing these feathers in the background. It might be fair to assume that we're going to get a closer shot in amongst them, which could look great, but we don't. Or Mila Jovovich here about to blow some powder to reveal where some hidden wires are. Does she blow that powder straight to the camera and into our faces for some 3D fun? No, she doesn't. I'm not saying it's wrong that they missed out on a chance to put in a bit of pop out there, but it would have livened the 3D up a bit, and like Pompeii, this is quite a silly film, where I don't think being obvious and playful with your 3D will make people think any less of you. So there's D'Artagnan with a telescope, that'll probably poke out of the screen, or at least stretch deep into it. Again, no it won't. You might know a scene in the classic 3D film The Walk, where there's some juggling going on. So you're filming jugglers in a 3D film. How are you going to show them? In The Walk, Zemeckis put his camera directly above, and it looked fabulous. Here, though, we see them in the distance. So thanks for your efforts, guys, but you might as well have been making pancakes for all that the 3D is going to show off your talents. There are guns, and 3D films always pop their guns out of the screen. Her gun here doesn't so much pop as gently nudge its way out of the screen, but why should it? This is how they wanted it to look in 3D, and it's their film, not mine. Then again, they do poke some swords out at us once or twice, so that's something if you're a pop-out fan. Swings and roundabouts, though, as this nifty-looking pair of automatic crossbows isn't shown in a very exciting piece of 3D. There is a moment when loads of guns are pointing. It's a very brief shot, shot and they're not in negative parallax, so the 3D isn't that obvious. But it does sort of work, I think, maybe unusually because it's so brief. I often think that in 3D films that if they held a shot a bit longer, we'd be able to enjoy it more. But this is one where I think if they'd held it much longer, we'd have realised that it's not that stereoscopically impressive in the first place. Another one of the lavish-looking things about the film is the costume design, which is excellent, and a lot of these clothes in close-up could reveal all sorts of 3D detail, like what do you call that collar on Juno Temple's dress there? That could look great from behind, but there's very little visible depth on show here. So obviously I'm being very rude about it, and that's not totally fair, as the film is clearly in 3D pretty much all the time, although not always, like this view and others like it look as good as flat. There's no discernible depth here at all, and this view actually is flat, fully two-dimensional. I know some people like to judge the quality of the 3D by removing their glasses to see how blurry the image is, so views like this would thrill them, as it's an absolute mess without your glasses on, but pop them back on and it looks almost completely flat, virtually no separation or space in between any of the elements in it. But what it does, like a lot of the views in the film, is sit a long way behind the screen, hence all the double image, but in a fairly flat way. So there's plenty of depth from the screen to the image, but not much depth or separation within the image. There's a shot that looks very clever and creative from a 3D point of view, which is seeing Juno Temple's queen in a few mirrors here, but as usual the 3D looks a lot weaker than it could for some reason. This really could have been good. One shot I did quite like is this view of the four of them raising their drinks, and the reason I like this is because the 3D here is quite effective and it comes as they deliver their one for all speech, so it's good 3D at a significant moment, and sort of as such it's possibly my favourite bit of 3D in the whole film. This is an amazing looking tree, a really great find by the filmmakers, and you know how good those branches could look in 3D, but they don't. I mean, it's a fine shot in 2D, but I really think it could have looked very significantly better in 3D than it does. There's a scene where a previously hidden staircase in the floor is revealed and it opens up. This is so ripe for an impressive 3D shot. It could have been a very creative piece of 3D, but the view we get of it is almost as flat as the floor itself was before the stairs appeared. Rows of troops often look great in 3D films. Remember those rows of stormtroopers in The Force Awakens, for example? Well, they don't look like that here. This is a tracking shot from right to left, and as a quick experiment, I took a couple of screen grabs, a few frames apart, to create what's, I think, referred to as a found 3D pair, and it looked a lot more three-dimensional than the view we get in the film. This looks like quite a dramatically set up shot of Jovovich as she's in the foreground with someone far in the background, but again there's very little 3D depth on offer to increase that feeling. There are some slow-motion debris blasts and other slow-motion bits with Jovovich doing her twisting and spinning thing, where some stuff blasts out around her, and a bit with a cannonball where the 3D's quite fun. Apart from those four raised goblets and that opening map, there was one shot where I thought this looks really good, and it's the view as the camera moves through the troops here. The 3D in this shot looks just right to me, and very briefly I was impressed. So, like when I looked at Pompeii, I think I've probably gone too far and painted a picture of a film that's not worth seeing in 3D, which isn't the feeling that I would want anyone to come away from this with. It's not actively bad, it's just disappointing to me that after all the great production design, it's disappointing that the 3D doesn't look a lot better. Now, I am aware that you won't have to rummage around Google too far to find some glowing reviews of this film's 3D, and somehow maybe it did look great on those reviewers' setups, but I have to say I have literally no idea what they're talking about. This is a film that I think if you handed the 2D copy to one of the best conversion houses, they could turn it into a far superior 3D experience. You'd probably have to pay them 20 million or so, and I'm not saying it would be easy, but I spent most of the film imagining how much better the 3D ought to be looking. If you listen to the director's commentary track, I think he mentioned the 3D model soldiers in that map at the start of the film, and that was his sole reference to the 3D across the entire film, which says to me that he wasn't all that interested in it. Either that, or he's not very proud of it. He talks about the Arri Alexa cameras, but doesn't mention a stereo rig, and he even refers to Mads Mikkelsen and his character's lack of depth perception. He specifically refers to depth perception in the commentary track on a 3D film, but he doesn't talk about the 3D. It's bizarre. Anyway, as you can see, he's absolutely right about Mikkelsen, and I can't help feeling that old Mads' character might have been the main 3D consultant on the film. So, just a very quick word about the film itself. To use the old joke, this is less a film for fans of Alexandre Dumas and more for fans of Alexander Dumas. That's not to say I didn't like it, I actually enjoyed it quite a lot, and as I've been saying, it looks fantastic, and Paul Anderson knows how to work wonders with a less than mega budget. There's action and romance and plenty of characters to engage with, and I think it's got a spot-on light-hearted tone to it. He likes to put his wife in a lot of his movies, so I do think it's a bit of a shame that he didn't marry an actress, and she's pretty much the lead character in this film. But there are a large number of enjoyable performances throughout. Matthew Macfadyen, Luke Evans, Christoph Waltz, Mads Mikkelsen there, Juno Temple, even Orlando Bloom I thought was just right and good fun here. And I'm sure I've forgotten one or two people. Freddie Fox was good as Louis XIII, and it was a fella called Logan Lerman, who was fine as a young D'Artagnan. So they put together a great cast, but then James Corden turned up and kind of spoiled it for me. It looks like they hope to do a follow-up film, but I don't think the box office of this one gave them the go-ahead for that, but I would have welcomed it. The whole thing with the flying ships might not have been all that faithful to the source, but I enjoyed it. It was very reminiscent of the flying ship in the brilliant film Stardust, and coincidentally, like that film, this has a closing song from Take That. Also, Stardust took some inspiration from The Princess Bride, and this film pays homage to that classic too, with a couple of its lines, and any film that's a fan of Princess Bride is all right in my book. Like I say, I'm quite fond of Paul W.S. Anderson. He always comes across as both very likeable and as being a film fan. And even though the critics never do, I like several of his films, and certainly this one included. But alongside Pompeii, I don't think this is much of a showcase for his skills as a 3D filmmaker. So I hope you found this in some way useful, and if so, I hope you'll join me again soon for another 3D Blu-ray review. Until then, thanks for looking in on this one. Cheers for now, bye bye.